The gunshot echoed through the valley, startling the horses tied outside the small whitewashed church, as Thea Reynolds ripped free from the grip of her would-be groom, her torn veil fluttering behind her like a wounded bird. The year was 1874, and in the New Mexico Territory, forced marriages weren't uncommon. But Thea had decided she wouldn't become another statistic, another woman forced to wed a man she despised. "You'll regret this, girl." Frederick Dalton shouted, his face twisted with rage as he clutched his bleeding arm where the bullet had grazed him. At 53, the cattle baron was more than 30 years her senior, and his deal with her stepfather had been simple: her hand in marriage in exchange for clearing family debts. Thea didn't look back as she hiked her white satin skirts above her ankles and ran. The desert heat struck her like a physical blow as she burst through the church doors, her golden brown hair tumbling free from its pins. The small mining town of Silver Creek spread before her, its dusty main street shimmering in the afternoon sun. "Someone stop her." Her stepfather's voice bellowed from inside the church, but Thea was already running, her white boots the only new item she'd been given for this travesty of a wedding kicking up dust as she fled. She didn't have a plan beyond escape. At 22, Thea had little to her name besides the clothes on her back and a fierce determination not to be sold like cattle. The only thing she knew was that she couldn't stay in Silver Creek, not with Dalton's influence stretching across the county. As shouts grew louder behind her, Thea darted into an alley between the general store and the blacksmith shop. Her heart pounded against her ribs, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The wedding dress too tight across the bodice by her stepfather's insistence restricted her breathing as she pressed herself against the weathered wooden wall. "Miss, you look like you could use some help." The voice, low and steady, startled her. Thea spun around, ready to flee again, when she saw him, a tall figure silhouetted against the sunlight at the other end of the alley. As he stepped forward, his features became clear. A young man, perhaps 25, with a tan, weathered face beneath a worn leather hat. His clothes were dusty from the trail, but there was something in his stance, confident yet non-threatening, that made her hesitate rather than run. "I don't need charity," she managed, though her voice trembled with the lie. The man took another step, and she noticed the silver star pinned to his vest. Not a local lawman, she knew them all, but a ranger perhaps, or a marshal. "I'm not offering charity, madam," he replied, his eyes a startling shade of green taking in her torn veil and wedding dress. "But I do believe in justice, and whatever's happening here doesn't look much like it." Before Thea could respond, a shout came from the street. "Check the alleys, she can't have gone far." The stranger moved with surprising quickness, positioning himself between Thea and the alley entrance. "I'm Ethan Ryder," he said quietly. "My horse is tethered behind the blacksmith's. If you want to leave, now's your chance." Thea hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Thea Reynolds," she whispered back, "and yes, I very much want to leave." Without another word, Ethan took her hand and led her deeper into the alley, away from the searching men. Behind the blacksmith shop stood a magnificent chestnut stallion, already saddled and loaded with supplies. "You were leaving town?" Thea asked as Ethan helped her onto the horse. "Just arrived, actually," he replied, swinging up behind her. "But plans change." With a click of his tongue and a gentle nudge of his heels, the horse set off at a trot, bypassing the main street and taking a back trail that led away from Silver Creek. Thea clutched the saddle horn, acutely aware of the stranger at her back, his arms on either side of her as he held the reins. "They'll come after us," she warned as the town began to shrink behind them. "I'm counting on it," was all Ethan said, urging the horse into a gallop as they hit open country. The desert landscape blurred around them as they rode, the afternoon sun beating down mercilessly. Thea's wedding dress, never designed for horseback riding, tangled around her legs, and the remains of her veil whipped in the wind. After what felt like hours but was likely only 40 minutes, Ethan guided the horse into a narrow canyon, following a nearly invisible trail that wound between towering red rock formations. "We'll rest here a moment," he said, reining in beside a small spring. "Your horse needs water and you look like you could use some too." As Thea slid from the saddle, her legs nearly buckled beneath her. Ethan caught her elbow, steadying her before releasing it quickly, respecting her space. "Thank you," she said, straightening her dress as best she could. "I owe you an explanation." Ethan shook his head as he led his horse to drink. "You don't owe me anything, Miss Reynolds, but I won't turn down information that might help me keep us both alive." His bluntness was refreshing after months of her stepfather's veiled threats and Dalton's oily compliments. Thea sank onto a sun-warmed rock and watched as Ethan filled a canteen from the spring. "Frederick Dalton," she began, accepting the water he offered. "Cattle baron, land speculator, and the man who owns half the county. My stepfather owed him money, a lot of money. The deal was simple, my hand in marriage in exchange for forgiveness of the debt." Ethan's jaw tightened. "And you weren't consulted?" "I was informed," Thea clarified, 2 days ago. "The wedding was arranged before I even knew there was to be one." She took a long drink from the canteen. "When I refused, my stepfather locked me in my room until this morning when his sister came to dress me for the ceremony. The shot I heard," a slight smile touched Thea's lips. "The minister's pistol. He keeps it under his Bible for protection. When Dalton grabbed my arm during the vows, I reached across the altar and took it. I didn't mean to fire, just to threaten, but Dalton lunged for me and—" She gestured to her torn veil. Ethan nodded slowly, processing her story. "Dalton's not a man who takes kindly to being refused, much less shot at. He'll have men searching every trail out of Silver Creek." "I know," Thea said quietly. "I don't expect you to risk yourself further. If you could just get me to the next town, and then what?" Ethan interrupted, his green eyes searching her face. "Dalton's reach extends beyond Silver Creek. You'd need to leave the territory entirely to be safe from him." The truth of his words hit Thea like a physical blow. She had no money, no transportation, and nowhere to go. Her mother had died 3 years ago, and her real father had abandoned them when she was an infant. There were no relatives to shelter her, no friends powerful enough to stand against Dalton. "I'll figure something out," she said with more confidence than she felt. "I always do." Ethan studied her for a long moment before speaking again. "I'm heading to Willow Springs, about 100 miles northwest of here. I have business there that can't wait. You're welcome to ride with me that far." Thea knew she should refuse. This man was a stranger, and though he'd helped her, she had no reason to trust him beyond this moment. But the alternative, trying to survive alone in the unforgiving desert with Dalton's men hunting her, was far worse. "Willow Springs," she repeated. "I've never been there. It's a decent town." "Growing, they have a proper sheriff and a judge who visits once a month." Ethan adjusted his hat, shielding his eyes from the sun. "Most importantly, it's outside Dalton's usual territory." After a moment's consideration, Thea nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Ryder, I accept your offer." "Ethan," he corrected. "If we're going to be traveling together, we might as well use our given names." "Ethan," she agreed, rising from her rock, "and you should call me Thea. Nobody calls me Theodora except my stepfather, and I've had enough of him to last a lifetime." A ghost of a smile crossed Ethan's face as he helped her back onto the horse. "Thea it is, then. We should move on. I want to put more distance between us and Silver Creek before nightfall." As they continued their journey, the sun began its slow descent toward the western horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Thea found herself gradually relaxing despite the circumstances, lulled by the rhythmic movement of the horse and the solid presence of the man behind her. "May I ask what business brings you to Willow Springs?" she ventured after they had ridden in companionable silence for some time. There was a pause before Ethan answered, his voice carefully neutral. "I'm tracking someone, a man who robbed a stagecoach near Fort Sumner last month. 2 passengers were killed." Thea felt a chill despite the desert heat. "You're a lawman, then?" "United States Marshal," he confirmed. Though at the moment, I'm not sure how much that badge will help either of us if Dalton's men catch up. The frank assessment of their situation should have frightened her, but instead, Thea found it oddly comforting. Ethan didn't sugarcoat the truth or treat her as though she couldn't handle it. "I've complicated your mission," she realized aloud. "I'm sorry for that." "Don't be," Ethan replied. "Some complications are worth the trouble." Before Thea could respond to that unexpected statement, Ethan suddenly stiffened behind her. "Riders," he said quietly, nodding toward a dust cloud visible in the distance behind them. "At least 3 moving fast." "Dalton's men," Thea whispered, fear tightening her throat, most likely. Ethan scanned the terrain ahead. "There's a box canyon about a mile from here with a narrow entrance. If we can reach it before they spot us, we might be able to lose them." He urged the horse into a faster gallop, and Thea clung to the saddle horn as they raced across the rocky ground. The box canyon appeared before them just as Ethan had described, a natural fortress with high walls, and a passage barely wide enough for a single horse to enter. Once inside, Ethan dismounted quickly and helped Thea down. "Stay with Thunder," he instructed, handing her the reins. "I'm going to try to cover our tracks at the entrance." As Ethan worked to obscure their trail, Thea took the opportunity to examine their shelter. The canyon was larger than it had appeared from outside, with a small pool of water fed by a trickle from the rocks above. A few stunted juniper trees provided meager shade, and the high walls offered protection from both the elements and prying eyes. "This isn't the first time you've hidden here," she observed when Ethan returned. He shook his head. "I've been a marshal for 3 years. You learn the terrain in this job or you don't survive long." He glanced at the canyon entrance. "I did what I could with our tracks, but if they're good trackers, it won't fool them for long. We need to be ready to move again at first light." "And tonight?" Thea asked, suddenly aware of how improper their situation would appear to society. Alone in the wilderness with a man she'd just met, wearing a wedding dress meant for another, if Ethan shared her concerns, he didn't show it. "Tonight we rest," he said simply, beginning to unpack his saddlebags. "I have some jerky and hardtack, not much of a wedding supper, I'm afraid." The unexpected touch of humor surprised a laugh from Thea. "Better company than what I would have had," she replied, and was rewarded with a genuine smile that transformed Ethan's serious face. As night fell over the canyon, they shared a sparse meal by the light of a small, smokeless fire that Ethan assured her wouldn't be visible from outside their shelter. The wedding dress had become unbearable in the desert heat, and Ethan, noticing her discomfort, had offered her a spare shirt and trousers from his pack. "They'll be too big," he warned, "but they'll be cooler than that dress." Thea accepted gratefully and changed behind a screen of junipers, emerging in clothes that swallowed her smaller frame but felt blissfully light after the constricting wedding gown. She'd used strips torn from the dress to bind the trousers at her waist and ankles and rolled the shirt sleeves to her elbows. "Better?" Ethan asked, looking up from where he was checking his rifle. "Much," Thea confirmed, sitting across from him by the fire. "Though I'm sorry to ruin your spare clothes. They'll wash," he said with a shrug, "and they look better on you anyway." The compliment, casually delivered, brought a flush to Thea's cheeks that she hoped the firelight would hide. To distract herself, she reached for the wedding veil she had discarded, examining the torn lace. "It was my mother's," she said softly. "The only thing of hers that my stepfather hadn't sold. He insisted I wear it, said it would bring a better price from Dalton if I looked properly bridal." Ethan's expression darkened at her words. "Your stepfather sounds like a man who deserves to meet the wrong end of a rifle." "He wasn't always so bad," Thea found herself defending, though she wasn't sure why. "After my mother died, he just changed. The drinking got worse and the gambling. Before I knew it, he'd lost everything, including our ranch. Dalton was his last hope to avoid debtor's prison." "So he sold you instead," Ethan said flatly. Thea couldn't argue with the brutal assessment. "Yes," she admitted, "he did." They fell silent then, the crackling of the fire and the soft sounds of the desert night the only noise between them. Finally, Ethan spoke again, his voice gentler than before. "You should get some sleep. I'll take first watch." "I'm not sure I can sleep," Thea confessed. "Every time I close my eyes, I see Dalton's face when I fired that pistol, like he couldn't believe I would dare to defy him." "Men like Dalton aren't used to being refused," Ethan observed, "especially by those they consider their property." "I am no man's property," Thea said fiercely, her hands clenching into fists. "I never will be." Ethan studied her across the fire, respect evident in his gaze. "No," he agreed, "you're not, and after what I saw today, I'd wager you never have been." The simple statement, delivered with such certainty, eased something tight in Thea's chest. For years, she had fought against the constraints placed upon her as a woman in the frontier, expected to be decorative, obedient, and eventually a wife and mother regardless of her own desires. To have this man, this stranger who had known her for less than a day, recognize her autonomy so casually was unexpectedly moving. "Thank you," she said quietly. Ethan nodded once, accepting her gratitude without requiring explanation. "Try to rest," he suggested again. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Thea settled onto the bedroll he had laid out for her, using her folded wedding dress as a pillow. Despite her earlier certainty that sleep would elude her, exhaustion soon pulled her under, the last image in her mind that of Ethan Ryder sitting sentinel by the dying fire, his profile strong against the star-filled desert sky. She woke to the gray light of pre-dawn and the sound of movement nearby. For a disorienting moment, Thea thought she was back in her bedroom in Silver Creek, preparing for another day of monotony. Then the events of the previous day rushed back, and she sat up quickly, scanning the canyon. Ethan was already awake, packing their few supplies. He looked up at her movement and offered a brief nod. "Morning," he said. "We should get moving soon. I checked the entrance, no sign of pursuit yet, but I don't want to push our luck." Thea rose, running a hand through her tangled hair in a futile attempt to bring it to order. "Did you sleep at all?" "A few hours," he replied, though the shadows under his eyes suggested otherwise. "I'm used to short nights." After a breakfast of jerky and the last of the hardtack, they prepared to leave. Thea had decided to continue wearing Ethan's spare clothes rather than the cumbersome wedding dress, though she carefully folded the gown and her mother's veil into a compact bundle that Ethan secured to the back of the saddle. "We can't take the main trails," Ethan said as they mounted. "Dalton will have men watching them. There's a path through the mountains that will add a day to our journey but should keep us clear of trouble." The path he spoke of proved to be little more than a game trail, winding through steep terrain that would have been impassable to a wagon or even a less sure-footed horse than Thunder. As they climbed higher into the foothills, the desert heat gave way to cooler air, and the sparse vegetation of the lowlands was replaced by pine forests and meadows bright with wildflowers. "It's beautiful," Thea murmured, breathing deeply of the pine-scented air. "I've lived in New Mexico territory my whole life, but I've never seen this part of it." "Most people stick to the established routes," Ethan replied. "These old trails were used by trappers and scouts decades ago, but they've been mostly forgotten now that the stagecoach lines are established." "How do you know them?" There was a pause before Ethan answered. "My father was a scout for the army. He taught me how to read the land, find water, track game and people. After he died, I kept exploring, mapping the places he'd shown me and finding new ones." It was the most personal information he had shared so far, and Thea recognized the gift of trust it represented. "He would be proud of how you're using what he taught you," she said softly. Ethan didn't respond verbally, but she felt the slight tightening of his arms around her, an acknowledgement of her words. They traveled steadily through the day, stopping occasionally to rest the horse and stretch their legs. By late afternoon, they had descended from the higher elevations back into rolling grasslands dotted with mesquite and sage. According to Ethan, They were making good time and should reach a small trading post by the following afternoon, a place where they could resupply and perhaps get news of any pursuit. As the sun began to set, they made camp in a sheltered hollow beside a stream. While Ethan tended to Thunder, Thea gathered wood for a small fire and filled their canteens with fresh water. The domestic routine felt strangely comfortable, as if they had been traveling companions for weeks rather than a single day. "You're good at this," Ethan observed as he returned to find a neat campsite and the beginnings of a fire. "Most city women would be complaining about the lack of comforts by now." "I'm hardly a city woman," Thea replied with a small smile. "I grew up on a ranch outside Silver Creek. My mother taught me how to manage outdoors before I was 10 years old. She said a woman in the territories couldn't afford to be helpless." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She was," Thea agreed, her voice softening with memory. "She came west with my father when she was 17, full of dreams about building a new life together. When he abandoned us, she could have returned east to her family, but she chose to stay and make her own way instead." "You're like her," Ethan said, the observation stated as simple fact. Thea looked up, surprised. "How would you know that?" "You ran from a forced marriage with nothing but the clothes on your back, no clear destination, and no guarantee of safety," he pointed out. "Most people would have accepted their fate, especially with a man as powerful as Dalton involved. That takes courage and a belief that you deserve better than what others have decided for you." His insight was uncomfortably accurate. Thea busied herself with the fire to avoid meeting his gaze. "What about you?" she asked, deflecting attention from herself. "What made you become a marshal?" If Ethan noticed her evasion, he didn't comment on it. "I was a scout for the army after my father died," he explained, settling on the ground across from her. "When the war ended, I drifted for a while, took odd jobs. Then I helped track down a gang that had robbed a bank in Santa Fe. The marshal who hired me was impressed enough to recommend me for a badge of my own." "Do you enjoy it?" "The work?" Ethan considered the question seriously before answering. "Most days, I like that there are clear lines between right and wrong in what I do. The law isn't perfect, but it's better than the alternative. And yet here you are, helping a woman who technically committed a crime," Thea pointed out. "I did steal the minister's gun and shoot a man after all." A rare smile crossed Ethan's face. "I never said I followed the letter of the law in all cases, just its spirit. And the spirit of justice says no woman should be forced to marry against her will, even if the law might look the other way." The conviction in his voice warmed Thea more than the small fire. In Silver Creek, the men she had known viewed the law as something malleable, to be shaped to their advantage. Ethan's straightforward moral compass was refreshingly different. As darkness fell completely, they shared a meal of rabbit that Ethan had snared earlier and wild onions that Thea had found growing near the stream. The simple food, cooked over an open fire and seasoned with hunger, tasted better than any elaborate dinner Thea could remember. "I'll take first watch tonight," she insisted as they finished eating. "You barely slept yesterday." Ethan looked like he might argue but then nodded, recognizing the sense in her offer. "Wake me in 4 hours," he instructed, settling onto his bedroll. "And don't hesitate to alert me if you hear anything unusual." "I won't," Thea promised, moving to sit with her back against a boulder that offered a good view of their surroundings. The night was peaceful, the only sounds the gentle murmur of the stream and the occasional call of a night bird. Thea found herself studying Ethan as he slept, his features relaxed in a way they never were when he was awake. In repose, he looked younger, the constant alertness that characterized him giving way to vulnerability. It was dangerous, she realized, this growing awareness of him as more than just her rescuer. In the span of 2 days, he had become someone whose opinion mattered to her, whose rare smiles she found herself working to earn. Such feelings were a luxury she couldn't afford, not when her future remained so uncertain. Resolutely, Thea turned her attention back to their surroundings, forcing herself to focus on the practical realities of their situation. They were still being hunted. Dalton was not a man to give up easily, especially after being publicly humiliated. Once they reached Willow Springs, she would need to find work, establish herself, perhaps save enough to travel further east where Dalton's influence couldn't reach. And Ethan would continue his pursuit of the stagecoach robber, fulfilling his duty as a marshal. Their paths, which had crossed so unexpectedly, would diverge again just as naturally. The thought brought a surprising pang of regret. 4 hours passed more quickly than Thea had anticipated. She moved to wake Ethan as promised, lightly touching his shoulder. His reaction was immediate. He was on his feet in an instant, hand reaching for his gun before his eyes had fully opened. "It's just me," Thea said quickly, stepping back. "Your watch." Ethan relaxed, dropping his hand from his weapon. "Sorry," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Old habits." "No need to apologize," Thea assured him. "I should have been more careful." As she settled onto her own bedroll, Thea wondered what experiences had conditioned such alertness in him, what dangers he had faced that made such instant vigilance necessary. There was so much about this man she didn't know and likely never would. The next morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect day for traveling. They made good time, following Ethan's chosen route through terrain that alternated between open grassland and scattered woodland. By noon, Thea could see smoke rising in the distance, the trading post Ethan had mentioned. "It's run by a Frenchman named Baptiste," Ethan explained as they approached. "He settled here 20 years ago after the fur trade dried up. Keeps to himself mostly, but he's fair in his dealings and doesn't ask too many questions." The trading post proved to be a sturdy log structure with a corral for horses and several outbuildings. A weathered sign above the door proclaimed "Baptiste's Trading Post" in faded letters. An older man with a gray beard and sharp eyes emerged as they dismounted, scrutinizing them carefully before his face broke into a smile of recognition. "Monsieur Ryder," he exclaimed, coming forward to clasp Ethan's hand. "It has been too long, my friend, and you bring a companion, I see." His shrewd gaze took in Thea's appearance, her too large men's clothing and trail dusty appearance. "Baptiste," Ethan greeted him with a nod. "This is Miss Thea Reynolds. We're traveling to Willow Springs and could use some supplies." If the Frenchman had questions about their unusual partnership, he kept them to himself. Of course. Come inside. You look in need of a good meal and perhaps some new clothes for the Mademoiselle Non." The interior of the trading post was surprisingly well stocked, with everything from canned goods to bolts of fabric. Baptiste's hospitality extended to a hot meal of venison stew and fresh bread, served at a small table in the back of the store. "You have news, I think?" Ethan asked once they had eaten. Baptiste nodded, glancing briefly at Thea before answering. "Men were here yesterday, 4 of them, asking if I had seen a marshal traveling with a young woman. They did not give names, but they wore the brand of the Circle D Ranch." "Dalton," Thea whispered, her appetite vanishing instantly. "I told them nothing, of course," Baptiste continued. "I said no one had passed this way in 3 days, but they were, persistent in their questioning. They mentioned a reward for information." Ethan's expression hardened. "Did they say where they were headed next?" They split up. 2 continued toward Willow Springs, 2 turned north toward the mountains. Baptiste leaned closer, lowering his voice. "They were armed heavily, Ethan, not like men simply searching for a runaway bride." The implication was clear. If Dalton's men found them, they weren't planning to bring Thea back unharmed. And Ethan, as an obstacle to their mission, would likely be eliminated. "We need to change our route," Ethan decided, his voice grim. "If they're watching the trails to Willow Springs, that's no longer a safe destination." "Where can we go?" Thea asked, fighting to keep her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. Baptiste cleared his throat. "My sister's place, perhaps, the ranch near Socorro. It is south of here, away from where these men search, and Marie has always been discreet." Ethan considered the suggestion. "It would mean an extra 3 days of travel at least, but it might be our best option." He turned to Thea. "What do you think?" The fact that he asked her opinion rather than simply making the decision struck Thea forcefully. Throughout her life, men had dictated her movements, her choices, her very future. Ethan's simple question acknowledged her agency in a way few ever had. "If you think it's safer, I trust your judgment," she said after a moment. "But I don't want to involve more people in my troubles than necessary." Marie would not consider it trouble, Baptiste assured her. Her ranch is remote with good defenses. She has taken in those who need shelter before. The decision made, they prepared to leave as quickly as possible. Baptiste insisted on providing Thea with clothes that actually fit simple but sturdy garments appropriate for travel and refused payment for either the supplies or the information. "You saved my life once," he reminded Ethan as they loaded the supplies onto Thunder. "Consider this partial repayment of an old debt." As they prepared to mount, Baptiste pulled Ethan aside for a private word. Thea couldn't hear what was said, but she noticed Ethan's expression grow even more serious as he listened. When he returned to her side, she raised a questioning eyebrow. "Baptiste says one of the men looking for us is James Cortez," Ethan explained, his voice low. "He's Dalton's foreman and has a reputation for excessive violence. If he's leading the search, Dalton isn't just looking to bring you back, he wants to make an example of you." The blunt assessment sent a chill through Thea despite the warm afternoon sun. "And you? What will they do to you if they find us together?" Ethan's smile was grim. "Nothing good, which is why we're not going to let them find us." They set off immediately, taking a seldom-used trail that Baptiste had recommended. It led southeast, away from their original destination and, hopefully, away from Dalton's searching men. The path was rougher than their previous route, forcing them to travel more slowly and with greater caution. As the afternoon wore on, Thea found herself increasingly aware of the danger she had brought into Ethan's life. He had been on a straightforward mission to capture a criminal, now he was fleeing from armed men who wouldn't hesitate to kill him. "I'm sorry," she said finally, breaking the silence that had fallen between them. "You should never have gotten involved in my problems." Ethan's response surprised her. "I'm not." "Not what, sorry," he clarified. "About getting involved." There was a pause before he continued, his voice quieter. "Some things are worth the risk, Thea." The simple statement hung between them, laden with meaning that neither seemed ready to fully explore. Thea found herself glad that she was riding in front of him, where he couldn't see the flush that warmed her cheeks or the small smile that curved her lips. They rode until dusk, making camp in a secluded hollow surrounded by high rocks that would shield any firelight from distant observers. As they worked together to set up camp, Thea gathering firewood while Ethan tended to Thunder, a comfortable routine had established itself between them, as if they had been traveling companions for years rather than days. "Baptiste's sister's ranch is about 2 days' ride from here if the weather holds," Ethan said as they sat by the small fire, eating a dinner of beans and bacon. "Once we're there, we can figure out our next move." "Our," Thea repeated, looking up at him in surprise. "I thought you would continue to Willow Springs after ensuring I was safe. Don't you still have a criminal to catch?" Ethan poked at the fire with a stick, not meeting her eyes. "The stage robber has likely moved on by now. And until we're sure Dalton's men aren't still hunting you, it wouldn't be right to leave you alone." His sense of duty was admirable, but Thea found herself wondering if that was all that motivated him. Over the past days, she had caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't aware, his green eyes thoughtful in a way that suggested his interest might extend beyond simple obligation. Or perhaps that was merely wishful thinking on her part. "I appreciate your concern," she said carefully, "but I don't want to be a burden. Once we reach the ranch, you should continue your work. I'll find my own way and go where?" Ethan challenged, looking up at her now. "Dalton's influence extends across most of the territory. Even if you managed to find work in some distant town, how long before word reached him? Before he sent men to bring you back?" The harsh reality of her situation struck Thea anew. She had escaped the immediate danger of the forced marriage, but her freedom remained precarious. Without money, connections, or even a clear destination, her options were severely limited. "Then what do you suggest?" she asked, unable to keep a note of frustration from her voice. "That I spend the rest of my life hiding on some remote ranch, always looking over my shoulder." Ethan was quiet for a long moment before responding. "No," he said finally, "that's no kind of life for anyone, but there might be another way." "What way?" Instead of answering directly, Ethan reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a folded paper, handing it to her. Thea opened it to find a wanted poster with a sketch of a hard-faced man. The name beneath the image read James Cortez, and the charges listed included murder, extortion, and cattle rustling. The reward offered was substantial. "Dalton's foreman?" she asked, confused. "You're hunting him too?" "Not officially," Ethan admitted. "But there's been suspicion for years that Dalton's operation isn't entirely legal, that he's been rustling cattle and intimidating smaller ranchers into selling out. Cortez is the enforcer, the one who does the dirty work, but there's never been enough evidence to move against Dalton himself." Understanding dawned slowly. "And you think I might have that evidence? You lived in Dalton's orbit. You might have seen or heard things without realizing their significance." Ethan leaned forward, his expression intent. "If we could build a case against Dalton, prove his criminal activities, it wouldn't matter how much influence he has. The territorial governor would have to act." The audacity of the plan left Thea momentarily speechless. Going from hunted to hunter, turning the tables on the man who had tried to buy her like property, the idea had a certain poetic justice that appealed to her deeply. "It would be dangerous," she said finally. "If Dalton suspected what we were doing." "Very dangerous," Ethan agreed. "And I wouldn't suggest it if I saw another way to ensure your safety long term, but a man like Dalton only understands one thing: power. As long as he has it, you'll never be truly free." Thea stared into the fire, considering the choice before her. The safe option would be to continue to Marie's ranch, perhaps stay there until she could save enough money to travel far away from New Mexico territory. But even then, the shadow of Dalton's reach would follow her, the fear of discovery a constant companion, or she could fight back. Use what she knew to help bring down the man who had tried to claim her against her will. It was risky, perhaps foolishly so, but the alternative was a lifetime of looking over her shoulder. "What exactly would this plan involve?" she asked finally. Relief flickered across Ethan's face. "First, we continue to Marie's ranch as planned. It's a safe place to regroup and gather information. Then, depending on what you can tell me about Dalton's operations, we start building our case quietly. I have contacts in Santa Fe who can help, people Dalton doesn't know." The methodical approach reassured Thea. This wasn't a reckless scheme born of revenge, but a carefully considered strategy. Still, doubts lingered. "And if we fail, if Dalton discovers what we're doing before we have enough evidence," Ethan's expression grew serious. "Then we'll have to disappear permanently, leave the territory, maybe even the country, head to California or up to Canada." "We." Thea repeated, catching the plural. "If it comes to that," Ethan said quietly, "I wouldn't abandon you to face Dalton's retaliation alone. That's a promise." The conviction in his voice touched something deep within Thea. In the short time they had known each other, this man had shown her more loyalty and respect than anyone in her life since her mother died. The realization was both comforting and terrifying in its implications. "Then I'll help you," she decided. "I'll tell you everything I know about Dalton and his business, but first we need to reach Marie's ranch safely." Ethan nodded, clearly relieved by her decision. "We'll leave at first light. The sooner we get there, the sooner we can start planning our next move." That night, as they took turns keeping watch, Thea found her thoughts repeatedly returning to Ethan's words. "I wouldn't abandon you." Such a simple statement, yet so profound in its meaning. In a world where she had learned the hard way that people left her father by choice, her mother by death, friends by circumstance, the promise of someone who would stay, who would face danger at her side rather than leave her to confront it alone, was almost too precious to believe. And yet, she did believe him. In the brief time they had known each other, Ethan Ryder had not once given her reason to doubt his word. If he said he would stand with her against Dalton, then he would regardless of the personal cost. The realization brought with it another, more unsettling thought. She was beginning to care for this man in a way that went beyond gratitude for his help or admiration for his principles. There was something else growing between them, something that made her pulse quicken when their hands accidentally touched, and her spirits lift when she coaxed one of his rare smiles. Such feelings were dangerous, a distraction they couldn't afford when their lives might depend on clear thinking and quick reactions. And yet, Thea couldn't bring herself to regret them entirely. Whatever happened in the days ahead, she was no longer facing her future alone. The dawn brought with it a heavy mist that clung to the valley floor, obscuring visibility beyond a few yards. Ethan viewed the weather with mixed feelings. The fog would help conceal their movements, but it also made navigation more challenging and could hide potential threats until they were dangerously close. "We'll have to stay alert," he told Thea as they broke camp. "The mist should burn off by mid-morning, but until then, we're traveling blind." They set off cautiously, Ethan guiding Thunder along the narrow trail by memory and occasional glimpses of landmarks through breaks in the fog. Thea sat tensely in front of him, her body alert to every sound in the muffled landscape around them. The first hour passed uneventfully, the mist gradually thinning as the sun rose higher. They had just reached a small clearing when Thunder suddenly stopped, ears pricked forward in alarm. A moment later, Ethan heard what had alerted the horse, the soft jingle of tack and the muted thud of hooves on damp earth. "Someone's coming," he whispered, immediately guiding Thunder off the trail and into the shelter of a dense thicket. "Don't move." They sat perfectly still as the sounds grew closer. Through gaps in the thinning fog, Ethan could make out the shapes of riders, 3 of them, moving slowly along the trail they had just left. As the men drew nearer, their features became visible, and Ethan felt Thea stiffen against him. "Cortez," she breathed, so quietly he barely heard her. The man in the lead was indeed James Cortez, instantly recognizable from the wanted poster. Tall and lean, with a pockmarked face and cold eyes, he carried himself with the dangerous confidence of someone accustomed to violence. His companions were cut from similar cloth-hard men with weapons prominently displayed. "They should have reached Baptiste's by now," one of the men was saying as they passed within 20 feet of the hidden observers. "If the old Frenchman lied to us." "He knows better," Cortez replied, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "But they might have changed course. Dalton wants the girl back alive, but the Marshal—" There was a chilling pause. "Well, accidents happen on the frontier." The casual way he spoke of murder sent a wave of cold anger through Ethan. He felt Thea trembling slightly against him and placed a steadying hand on her arm, silently urging her to remain still until the danger passed. The riders continued down the trail, their voices fading as the fog swallowed them. Even after they were gone from sight, Ethan waited a full 10 minutes before daring to move. "They're heading toward Baptiste's," he said quietly, "following our original trail." "That gives us an advantage. They're looking in the wrong direction." Thea nodded, her face pale but composed. "How did they find us so quickly? We were careful to cover our tracks." "Someone must have talked," Ethan replied grimly. "Not Baptiste. I trust him with my life, but perhaps someone in town saw us arrive and leave. All it would take is one person wanting Dalton's reward money." The encounter had confirmed what Ethan already suspected. Dalton wasn't just trying to reclaim his intended bride. He wanted to eliminate the man who had interfered with his plans. The situation had escalated beyond a personal matter to a deadly game of hunter and hunted. "We need to change our route again," he decided. "Take a wider detour to Marie's ranch. It will add another day to our journey, but it's too risky to continue on this trail." Thea didn't argue, recognizing the necessity of the precaution. As they set off in a new direction, cutting across country rather than following established paths, she remained silent, lost in thought. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked after they had ridden for some time. "That I've brought nothing but trouble into your life," she replied honestly. "And that despite that, I'm selfishly glad you were the one who found me in that alley." The admission, simple and direct, touched Ethan more deeply than he cared to examine. "I'm glad too," he said after a moment, "though I'd prefer circumstances that didn't involve being hunted by killers." His attempt at humor drew a small smile from Thea. "What a coincidence, so would I." The brief lightening of the mood was welcome, but it couldn't entirely dispel the gravity of their situation. They traveled cautiously for the remainder of the day, avoiding open ground where possible and stopping frequently to listen for pursuit. By nightfall, they had covered less distance than hoped, but had seen no further sign of Cortez and his men. They made camp in a shallow cave set into a hillside, building a small fire well back from the entrance where its light wouldn't be visible to distant observers. As they shared a meager supper of jerky and canned beans, Ethan found himself studying Thea, impressed by her resilience. Most women of his acquaintance would have been reduced to tears or hysteria by the events of the past few days, yet she remained composed, adapting to each new challenge with remarkable strength. "You should try to get some sleep," he suggested as they finished eating. "I'll take first watch tonight." Thea nodded, too tired to argue. She settled onto her bedroll, pulling a blanket around her shoulders against the night chill. "Ethan," she said softly, her eyes already closing, "thank you for everything." "Sleep," he replied gently. "We'll reach Marie's tomorrow if all goes well." As Thea drifted into slumber, Ethan moved to the cave entrance, positioning himself where he could observe the surrounding terrain while remaining hidden from casual view. The night was clear, stars scattered across the black velvet of the sky in dazzling profusion. Under different circumstances, it would have been a peaceful scene, but peace was a luxury Ethan couldn't afford, not with Cortez and his men somewhere in the vicinity. The encounter that morning had only reinforced the danger they faced. If Dalton's men caught up to them, the confrontation would be violent and potentially fatal. Ethan's hand drifted to the revolver at his hip, checking its readiness by habit. As a marshal, he was no stranger to dangerous situations, but this one felt different. It wasn't just his own life at stake, but Thea's as well. The responsibility weighed heavily on him, all the more because of the feelings he was developing for her, feelings that had no place in their current circumstances, but refused to be denied. In the few days since their paths had crossed, she had impressed him with her courage, her intelligence, and her determination. Unlike so many women who viewed the frontier as a hardship to be endured, Thea embraced its challenges, adapting to their harsh journey with remarkable resilience. She was, Ethan realized, exactly the kind of partner a man in his position should seek, strong enough to face the difficulties of frontier life yet soft enough to make that life worth living. But such thoughts were premature, perhaps even foolish. Their immediate concern had to be survival, not the tentative attraction growing between them. Until Dalton was dealt with, neither of them could afford the distraction of deeper emotions. With that sobering thought, Ethan turned his attention back to their surroundings, alert for any sign of approaching danger. The night passed slowly, each sound in the darkness a potential threat that required investigation. When it came time to wake Thea for her watch, he did so reluctantly, knowing she needed rest but unwilling to risk both of them sleeping at once. "Anything?" she asked as she rose, immediately alert despite her interrupted sleep. "Nothing concerning," Ethan assured her. "The usual night sounds, nothing more." Thea nodded, moving to take his place at the cave entrance. "Rest," she urged. "I'll wake you if anything changes." Ethan settled onto his bedroll, but sleep proved elusive. His mind refused to quiet, replaying the day's events and planning for various contingencies. What if Cortez had discovered their change of direction? What if Marie's ranch wasn't as safe as Baptiste believed? What if the evidence Thea could provide wasn't enough to build a case against Dalton? Somewhere amidst these cycling worries, exhaustion finally claimed him, pulling him into a fitful sleep filled with fragmented dreams of pursuit and danger. When Thea woke him as dawn was breaking, he felt scarcely rested at all. "You should have woken me earlier," he said, noting the shadows under her eyes. "You needed the sleep," she replied simply. And nothing happened, not even a coyote passed by. They broke camp quickly, eager to cover the remaining distance to Marie's ranch. According to Ethan's calculations, they should reach it by late afternoon if they maintained a steady pace. The terrain was growing more familiar now. He had visited Baptiste's sister once before, years ago, when tracking a different fugitive. Marie Rousseau's ranch was smaller than most in the region, but strategically located in a valley with excellent visibility in all directions. It would be difficult for anyone to approach undetected, which was precisely why Ethan had agreed with Baptiste's suggestion. If any place in the territory could offer them temporary safety, it was there. The day warmed quickly as they rode, the spring sun beating down from a cloudless sky. They traveled in companionable silence for the most part, each lost in their own thoughts, but drawing comfort from the other's presence. Occasionally, Ethan would point out a landmark or share a brief story connected to the land they were crossing, and Thea would respond with questions or observations of her own. By mid-afternoon, they had reached the ridge overlooking Marie's valley. Ethan reined in thunder, taking a moment to survey the ranch below. The main house was a substantial adobe structure surrounded by several outbuildings and corrals. A small herd of cattle grazed in a nearby pasture, and smoke rose steadily from the chimney, indicating occupation. "It looks peaceful," Thea observed, a note of wistfulness in her voice. "Marie's worked hard to keep it that way," Ethan replied. "Her husband was killed by Apaches 15 years ago. Since then, she's run the place alone with just a couple of hired hands to help with the heavier work." They descended into the valley cautiously, Ethan alert for any sign of unexpected visitors or trouble. As they approached the ranch yard, a woman emerged from the house, a rifle held casually but competently in her hands. She was in her 50s, with silver threading through her dark hair and a face weathered by sun and hardship. "That's far enough," she called in a French-accented voice. "State your business, Marie Rousseau," Ethan replied, raising one hand to show he meant no harm. "I'm Ethan Ryder." "Your brother Baptiste sent us." The woman's stance relaxed slightly, though she didn't lower the rifle. "Baptiste sent word you might come. He did not mention you would bring a companion." "This is Thea Reynolds," Ethan explained. "She's in need of sanctuary, as am I. We're being pursued by men who mean us harm." Marie studied them for a long moment before nodding once. "Come inside," she said, finally lowering her weapon. "You look in need of rest and a proper meal. We can talk after." The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly comfortable, with sturdy furniture, colorful woven rugs, and shelves lined with books, a rarity on the frontier. Marie insisted they eat before discussing their situation, serving a hearty stew with freshly baked bread that reminded Thea how inadequate their trail rations had been. Only after they had eaten and the dishes were cleared did Marie sit across from them, her shrewd eyes moving between their faces. "Now," she said, "tell me why you are running and who pursues you." Between them, Ethan and Thea related the events of the past days, the forced wedding, the escape, and their subsequent flight from Dalton's men. Marie listened without interruption, her expression giving away nothing of her thoughts. "Frederick Dalton," she said when they had finished. "I know of him. A man who believes his money entitles him to whatever he desires." Her gaze settled on Thea, softening slightly, "including young women who do not wish to be purchased. We had hoped to stay here briefly," Ethan explained. "Just long enough to formulate a plan." Thea may have information that could help build a case against Dalton for various crimes, but we need time to organize it and to contact allies who can help. Marie nodded slowly. You may stay as long as necessary. My home is well defended, and few know of its connection to Baptiste. You will be safer here than anywhere else in the territory for the moment. The relief of having reached sanctuary, temporary though it might be, was profound. For the first time in days, Thea felt the constant tension in her shoulders begin to ease. Here, at least, they could rest, plan, and prepare for the confrontation that lay ahead. Marie showed them to separate rooms, a courtesy that Thea appreciated even as she found herself oddly reluctant to be parted from Ethan after their days of close proximity. The room assigned to her was small but comfortable, with a real bed instead of a bedroll on hard ground and a window that overlooked the valley. After the luxury of a bath with actual hot water, another frontier rarity that Marie had insisted upon, Thea felt almost human again. She had just finished dressing in clean clothes provided by her hostess when a soft knock came at her door. "Come in," she called, expecting Marie with additional linens or perhaps a lamp for the evening. Instead, it was Ethan who entered, freshly bathed and wearing clean clothes himself. The transformation was striking without the trail dust, and with his hair still damp from washing, he looked younger, less careworn. The sight sent an unexpected flutter through Thea's stomach. "Marie thought you might want this," he said, holding out a small leather-bound book. She said it belonged to her daughter who now lives in Santa Fe, something to read if you have trouble sleeping. "That's very thoughtful," Thea replied, accepting the book, a collection of poetry she noted with pleasure. "Please thank her for me." Ethan nodded but made no move to leave. Instead, he seemed to be gathering his thoughts, an unusual hesitation for a man normally so direct. "Is something wrong?" Thea prompted when the silence stretched too long. "No," he said quickly. "Nothing's wrong. I just wanted to check that you're comfortable. And to let you know that I'll be leaving at first light tomorrow." "Leaving?" The word came out sharper than Thea intended, surprise making her voice rise. "Why, I thought we agreed to stay here while we plan our next steps." "You're staying," Ethan clarified. "I need to ride to Santa Fe to contact the territorial marshal and gather information. With luck, I can be back within a week." The logic was sound, but Thea couldn't suppress a surge of anxiety at the thought of being separated. Over the past days, Ethan's presence had become a constant in her world, a source of strength and security in the midst of chaos. The prospect of his absence, even temporarily, was more disturbing than she cared to admit. "I see," she said, struggling to keep her voice neutral. "Of course." "That makes sense." Ethan studied her face, reading more than she had intended to reveal. "I wouldn't go if there was another way," he said quietly. "But we need official support if we're going to move against Dalton, and those conversations have to happen in person." "I understand," Thea assured him, forcing a smile. "Truly. And Marie seems more than capable of providing protection while you're gone." "She is," Ethan agreed. "Her ranch hands are loyal and well-armed, and Marie herself is a better shot than most men I know. You'll be safe here." The reassurance helped, but it didn't entirely dispel Thea's unease. It wasn't just physical safety she feared losing with Ethan's departure, but something less tangible, the comfort of his presence, the strength she drew from his unwavering support. "Just be careful," she said finally. "Dalton's reach extends to Santa Fe as well, if his men learn you're there." "I'll be cautious," Ethan promised. "I have friends in the capital who can provide discreet assistance. No one will know my real purpose for being there." He moved toward the door but paused with his hand on the latch. "While I'm gone, try to recall everything you can about Dalton's business dealings, any conversations you overheard, documents you might have seen, names of people who seemed suspicious. The more detail we have, the stronger our case will be." Thea nodded, determined to be useful despite the hollow feeling Ethan's impending departure had created. "I will. I'll write everything down so we don't miss anything important." "Good." Ethan hesitated again, as if there was more he wanted to say but couldn't find the words. Finally, he simply nodded. "Good night, Thea. Rest well." After he had gone, Thea moved to the window, gazing out at the darkening valley. The sense of sanctuary that Marie's ranch had initially provided seemed suddenly less certain. Logic told her that she was as safe here as anywhere in the territory, that Ethan's journey to Santa Fe was necessary for their plan to succeed. Yet emotion insisted otherwise, warning that separation meant vulnerability, that together they were stronger than apart. With a sigh, she turned from the window and opened the book of poetry Ethan had brought. Perhaps reading would quiet her restless thoughts and allow her to sleep. Tomorrow would come regardless of her worries, and when it did, she needed to be clear-headed and focused on the task Ethan had set for her, remembering, documenting, building the case that might finally free her from Dalton's shadow. As expected, Ethan departed at first light, taking advantage of the early hour to reduce the chance of being observed leaving the ranch. The farewell was brief, practical, neither of them acknowledging the undercurrent of concern that hung between them. 7 days, he promised as he mounted Thunder. Sooner if possible. Thea nodded, wrapping her shawl tighter against the morning chill. Be safe, she replied simply. With a final nod, Ethan rode out, following a different trail than the one they had arrived on, another precaution against potential watchers. Thea stood in the yard until he disappeared from sight, then turned back to the house where Marie waited with a sympathetic expression. He is a good man, your Marshal, the older woman observed as they walked inside. Not many would risk themselves for a stranger as he has for you. He's not my Marshal, Thea corrected automatically, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. And he's only doing his duty. Marie's knowing smile suggested she wasn't convinced. If you say so, chérie, now come help me with breakfast. Idle hands lead to worry and there is much to do on a ranch. The advice was sound. Over the next days, Thea threw herself into ranch work alongside Marie and her 2 hired hands brothers named Miguel and Pablo, who lived in a small cabin near the corrals. The physical labor was exhausting but satisfying, leaving little energy for anxiety about Ethan's absence or Dalton's continuing threat. In the evenings, after the day's work was done, Thea would sit at Marie's kitchen table with paper and pencil, methodically recording everything she could remember about Frederick Dalton's business dealings. It was a surprisingly rich trove of information once she began to examine her memories critically. There were the late-night meetings with men whose cattle bore brands different from Dalton's, yet who departed with significant sums of money. The ledgers she had glimpsed in his study showing profits far exceeding what his known herds could produce. The conversations that went silent when she entered a room, resuming only after she had departed. Most damning of all was a conversation she had overheard between Dalton and Cortez just days before the wedding. They had been discussing a shipment of cattle to be delivered to a buyer in Colorado, with Cortez reporting that all evidence of the original brands has been removed. This is good, Marie commented on the 4th evening, reviewing Thea's notes. Very specific. Names, dates, descriptions. The territorial marshal will be able to investigate these leads. If Ethan can convince him to take action, Thea pointed out, Dalton has friends in high places. But also enemies, Marie reminded her. Men like him always do. The question is whether those enemies are powerful enough to act against him when given the opportunity. It was a sobering thought. Their entire plan rested on the assumption that official channels could be persuaded to move against Dalton given sufficient evidence. If that assumption proved false, if Dalton's influence extended even to the territorial government, then their efforts would not only fail, but potentially place them in even greater danger. As the week progressed with no word from Ethan, Thea found her anxiety increasing despite her best efforts to remain focused on the present. Had he reached Santa Fe safely? Was he encountering resistance to their plan, or worse, had Dalton's men somehow intercepted him en route? The uncertainty was maddening, all the more so because there was nothing she could do but wait and continue gathering her recollections. Each day that passed without news stretched her nerves a little tighter, until even Marie noticed her increasing tension. "He will return," the older woman assured her as they worked together in the garden on the 6th day. "Your Marshal is not a man who breaks his promises lightly." Thea didn't bother to correct the possessive this time. "I know," she said instead. "I just can't help wondering what's happening in Santa Fe, whether our plan has any chance of success." Marie straightened from the row of beans she was weeding, studying Thea with shrewd eyes. "What will you do if it doesn't, if Dalton cannot be brought down through legal means?" It was a question Thea had been avoiding, focusing instead on the hope that their evidence would be sufficient. The alternative, a lifetime of hiding, perhaps even leaving the territories altogether, was too daunting to contemplate fully. "I don't know," she admitted. "Start over somewhere far from here, I suppose, California maybe, or even back east. Alone," Marie pressed. The question carried implications Thea wasn't ready to address. Her feelings for Ethan had grown steadily during their journey and his absence, developing from gratitude into something deeper and more complex. But whether he shared those feelings, and more importantly, whether either of them was prepared to act on them given the circumstances, remained uncertain. "That would depend on many things," she replied carefully. Marie nodded, seemingly satisfied with the evasive answer. "Life is short, Sherry, especially on the frontier. When you find someone worth holding on to, my advice is not to let go easily." Before Thea could respond to this unexpectedly direct counsel, a shout came from the direction of the house. Pablo was running toward them, his expression urgent. "Riders coming," he called in Spanish-accented English. "4 of them from the North Ridge." Marie was immediately alert, her gardening forgotten. "Friends or strangers?" "Too far to tell," Pablo replied. "Miguel is watching them from the roof." Without hesitation, Marie headed for the house, gesturing for Thea to follow. "Inside, quickly, it may be nothing, but we take no chances." The next few minutes were a flurry of activity as Marie and her hands prepared for potential danger. Rifles were positioned near windows, shutters partially closed to provide cover while maintaining visibility. Thea was directed to a bedroom at the back of the house, away from the approaching riders. "Stay here until we know who they are," Marie instructed, handing her a loaded pistol. "If trouble comes, there is a trap door beneath the rug leading to a root cellar. It connects to a tunnel that emerges in the creek bed half a mile east. Use it if you must." The precautions were alarming, but Thea appreciated the older woman's thoroughness. As she waited in the bedroom, pistol in hand, she strained to hear any sound that might indicate the identity of the approaching riders. Had Dalton's men finally tracked them to the ranch? Was the relative peace of the past days about to shatter? A shout from outside broke the tense silence, not of alarm but recognition. A moment later, Marie's voice called her name. Thea emerged cautiously from the bedroom to find the older woman smiling broadly. "It is your Marshal," she announced, with 3 companions. The relief that flooded through Thea was so intense it nearly made her dizzy. She moved quickly to the front of the house and out onto the porch, just as the riders entered the yard. Ethan was in the lead, dusty from the trail but otherwise appearing unharmed. Behind him rode 3 men Thea didn't recognize, all wearing badges similar to Ethan's. "You're early," she called as Ethan dismounted, unable to keep the relief from her voice. "Matters progressed faster than expected," he replied, his eyes quickly scanning her as if assuring himself she was well. "The territorial marshal was very interested in the information I shared." One of the other riders, an older man with iron gray hair and a weathered face, stepped forward. "Miss Reynolds, I'm Marshal William Hargrove. Marshal Ryder has told me quite a story about your experience with Frederick Dalton." "It's all true," Thea assured him, suddenly anxious that this official might doubt her account. Hargrove nodded. "I believe you. Dalton's activities have been of concern to my office for some time, but we've lacked sufficient evidence to move against him." Your testimony, combined with the documentation you've been preparing, may finally change that." The direct acknowledgement of her contribution was unexpectedly validating. For years, Thea had been dismissed as just a woman, her observations and insights disregarded by the men around her. To have this high-ranking official value her information enough to ride personally to retrieve it was a novel experience. "I've written down everything I can remember," she said, gesturing toward the house. "Names, dates, conversations. I'm not sure how much will be useful, but every detail helps," Hargrove assured her. "We're building a case not just against Dalton but his entire operation. Cortez is already wanted for murder in 2 territories. Now we aim to connect those crimes directly to Dalton's orders." As the group moved inside to review Thea's documentation, she found herself watching Ethan, noting the subtle changes a week had wrought. He seemed simultaneously more relaxed and more focused, as if having official support had both relieved a burden and sharpened his purpose. When he caught her looking, a brief smile crossed his face, one that reached his eyes in a way his rare smiles seldom did. It was a private expression, meant only for her, and it sent a warm current through Thea's chest despite the serious circumstances. The rest of the day was consumed with discussions of strategy and evidence. Marshal Hargrove and his deputies reviewed Thea's notes meticulously, asking occasional questions for clarification, but generally finding her documentation thorough and credible. By evening, a plan had begun to take shape, one that both excited and terrified Thea with its boldness. Dalton will be attending the territorial governor's reception in Santa Fe next week, Hargrove explained as they gathered around Marie's table after dinner. "It's a public event with significant security. If we're going to arrest him, that's our best opportunity to do so without risking civilian casualties. And you want me there," Thea concluded, having anticipated this direction from earlier comments, "to identify him formally and provide testimony." Hargrove nodded. "Your presence serves 2 purposes. It allows for immediate sworn testimony, and it sends a message that Dalton's intimidation tactics have failed. The latter is important for encouraging other witnesses to come forward." The prospect of confronting Dalton again, of standing before him, not as a frightened bride, but as his accuser, was simultaneously terrifying and empowering. It would mean leaving the safety of Marie's ranch, traveling to Santa Fe, and placing herself once more in the path of a man who had already demonstrated his willingness to use violence to get what he wanted. "He'll have men with him," Ethan pointed out, voicing the concern that had immediately occurred to Thea. "Even at the governor's reception, he won't be completely alone. We'll have our own men in place," Hargrove assured him, "and the governor's security detail will be briefed on the situation." Dalton would have to be a fool to attempt anything in such a public setting. The logic was sound, but it did little to ease the knot of anxiety forming in Thea's stomach. Logic had little power against the visceral memory of Dalton's rage when she had defied him at the altar, the cold calculation in his eyes as he had reached for her. "When would we leave?" she asked, her decision already made despite her fears. This was her chance to reclaim her freedom permanently, to ensure that Dalton could never threaten her again. Whatever the risk, it had to be taken. "Day after tomorrow," Hargrove replied. "That gives us time to organize proper escort and for you to prepare. The reception is in 5 days, which allows for unhurried travel and final briefings in Santa Fe." As the conversation turned to logistics routes, accommodations, security measures, Thea found her attention drifting to Ethan, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during much of the discussion. There was a tension in his posture that hadn't been present earlier, a tightness around his eyes that suggested concern beyond the operational details being discussed. When the meeting finally broke up for the night, with Hargrove and his deputies accepting Marie's offer of beds in the bunkhouse, Thea deliberately lingered in the kitchen, hoping for a moment alone with Ethan. Her patience was rewarded when he stayed behind as well, waiting until the others had departed before speaking. "You don't have to do this," he said without preamble. "Hargrove has enough evidence to move against Dalton without your direct testimony. You could remain here safe while we handle the arrest." The offer was more tempting than Thea wanted to admit. But she knew herself well enough to recognize that accepting it would mean living with doubt and fear, always wondering if Dalton might somehow evade justice without her presence to ensure otherwise. "I do have to do this," she replied quietly. "Not for Marshal Hargrove or his case, but for myself. I need to see Dalton face the consequences of his actions to know beyond any doubt that he can never threaten me or anyone else again." Ethan studied her face for a long moment, as if searching for uncertainty he could use to change her mind. Finding none, he nodded slowly. "I understand. But I don't have to like it." "No," Thea agreed with a small smile. "You don't, you just have to help me ensure it succeeds." "That I can do," he promised, and there was something in his voice, a depth of commitment that went beyond professional duty that made Thea's heart beat faster. "Whatever happens in Santa Fe, you won't face it alone." The words echoed her own thoughts from days earlier, when she had feared being separated from him. Now, with their paths aligned toward a common goal, that fear had transformed into something else, a certainty that whatever the future held, it would be better faced together than apart. "Thank you," she said simply, unable to articulate the fuller extent of her gratitude and growing affection. Ethan seemed to understand nonetheless. He reached out, hesitated, then gently took her hand in his, the first deliberately intimate contact between them that wasn't necessitated by their travel arrangements. "Get some rest," he advised, his thumb brushing lightly across her knuckles. "Tomorrow we'll be busy with preparations." As Thea retired to her room that night, her hand still tingling from Ethan's touch, she found herself contemplating not just the immediate future, the journey to Santa Fe, the confrontation with Dalton, but what might lie beyond. If their plan succeeded, if Dalton was arrested and convicted, she would truly be free to determine her own path for the first time in years. The question that lingered as she drifted towards sleep was whether that path might include the man who had helped her claim her freedom, and who, in the process, had begun to claim a place in her heart. The journey to Santa Fe proceeded with military precision, a stark contrast to Thea and Ethan's earlier flight from Silver Creek. Marshal Hargrove had arranged for a small cavalry escort to join them at the territorial road, providing both protection and official legitimacy to their travels. Thea rode in a small wagon with one of the deputies, while Ethan and the others formed a protective perimeter around the convoy. Despite the relative comfort and security of the arrangement, Thea found herself missing the closeness of riding double with Ethan. Their conversations on this journey were limited to brief exchanges during rest stops, always in the company of others. It was as if the official nature of their mission had erected a barrier between them, transforming their relationship from the intimate partnership of fugitives to the more formal association of witness and lawman. Santa Fe itself was a revelation larger and more cosmopolitan than Silver Creek, with adobe buildings lining wide streets and a central plaza dominated by the palace of the governors. The city blended Spanish, Mexican, and American influences in its architecture and population, creating a vibrant atmosphere unlike anything Thea had experienced before. They were housed in a small hotel near the territorial offices, with Thea given a private room and the marshals taking turns standing guard in the hallway outside. The precaution was probably unnecessary. There was no indication that Dalton knew of their presence in the city, but Hargrove insisted on maintaining security until the arrest was complete. The day before the governor's reception, Thea was summoned to the territorial marshal's office for final preparations. The building was imposing, its entrance guarded by uniformed men who examined credentials carefully before allowing visitors to enter. Inside, she was escorted to a conference room where Hargrove, his deputies, and Ethan awaited her. "Miss Reynolds," Hargrove greeted her formally. "Thank you for joining us. We need to review the procedure for tomorrow evening to ensure everything goes smoothly." The plan, as outlined, was straightforward but nerve-wracking. Thea would attend the reception as a guest of the marshal's office, escorted by Ethan. They would arrive after Dalton was confirmed to be present, but before the formal proceedings began. Hargrove and his deputies would be positioned strategically throughout the venue. At a predetermined signal, they would converge on Dalton, with Thea formally identifying him before he was taken into custody. "The governor has been briefed on the situation," Hargrove explained. "He's supportive of our actions, but insists the arrest be handled with minimum disruption to the event. That means absolute precision in timing and execution." As the others discussed tactical details, entry points, position assignments, contingency plans, Thea found her attention drawn repeatedly to Ethan. He participated actively in the planning, his suggestions revealing both his experience and his concern for her safety. Every scenario he proposed included provisions for protecting her from potential retaliation, whether from Dalton himself or his associates. When the meeting concluded, Ethan offered to escort Thea back to the hotel. As they walked through the streets of Santa Fe, now bathed in the golden light of late afternoon, she found herself searching for words to bridge the distance that had grown between them since leaving Marie's ranch. "Are you worried about tomorrow?" she finally asked, opting for directness. Ethan considered the question before answering. "Not about the arrest itself. Hargrove's plan is solid and Dalton would be a fool to resist in such a public setting." He glanced at her. "I'm more concerned about what comes after." "After? The legal process will be lengthy," he explained. "Even with your testimony and the evidence we've gathered, these cases often take months to come to trial. During that time, Dalton will still have resources and allies even if he's confined." The implication was clear. Her safety wouldn't be guaranteed simply by Dalton's arrest. As long as he had wealth and influence, he remained a potential threat, perhaps even more motivated for revenge after the public humiliation of being taken into custody. "So this isn't really an ending," Thea realized aloud. "Just the beginning of another chapter." "For the case, yes," Ethan agreed. He hesitated before adding, "but perhaps an ending for other things." Something in his tone made Thea stop walking, turning to face him directly. "What do you mean?" Ethan met her gaze, his expression unusually vulnerable. "Once Dalton is arrested, my official involvement ends. Hargrove will assign deputies to ensure your safety during the trial, but my duties will take me elsewhere. There's still a stagecoach robber to apprehend, other cases waiting." The reminder of their temporary alliance, born of necessity rather than choice, sent a cold wave through Thea's chest. Of course, Ethan would return to his regular duties once the immediate crisis was resolved. She had known this from the beginning, yet somehow had allowed herself to imagine a different outcome. "I understand," she said, proud that her voice remained steady despite the sudden hollow feeling inside. "You've already done far more than duty required. I wouldn't expect you to continue as my protector indefinitely." Ethan shook his head slightly, as if she had missed his point. "That's not," he began, then stopped as a group of people approached on the narrow sidewalk, forcing them to step aside. By the time the path was clear again, the moment for candor had passed. They resumed walking in silence, each preoccupied with thoughts left unspoken. When they reached the hotel, Ethan escorted Thea to her room with formal politeness, promising to return the following evening to accompany her to the reception. Alone in her room, Thea moved to the window, gazing out at the unfamiliar city as twilight descended. Tomorrow would bring the confrontation she had been both dreading and anticipating, the chance to face Dalton not as a victim, but as his accuser. She should be focused entirely on preparing for that moment, on ensuring that her testimony would be clear and compelling. Instead, Her mind kept returning to Ethan's unfinished sentence and the look in his eyes as he had spoken. There had been something there beyond professional concern, something personal and perhaps as conflicted as her own emotions. With a sigh, Thea turned from the window. Tomorrow would have to take precedence over such speculations. Once Dalton was in custody, there would be time to address whatever might or might not exist between her and Ethan Ryder. For now, justice had to be her primary concern. The governor's reception was held in the grand ballroom of Santa Fe's newest hotel, a 3-story structure that combined American architectural grandeur with traditional Spanish details. As Thea entered on Ethan's arm, wearing a borrowed gown of deep blue silk that Marie had hastily altered to fit her slimmer frame, she was momentarily overwhelmed by the elegance of the gathering. Crystal chandeliers illuminated a space filled with the territory's elite government officials, wealthy businessmen, military officers, and their elegantly attired wives. A small orchestra played in one corner, though few were dancing yet, most guests preferring to converse in small groups while servants circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. "Are you all right?" Ethan asked quietly, noting her hesitation at the threshold. Thea nodded, drawing strength from his presence beside her. "Yes, it's been a while since I attended such a formal event. You look like you belong here," he assured her, his gaze warm as it swept over her. More than most of them, in fact. The compliment brought color to Thea's cheeks, but before she could respond, Marshal Hargrove appeared at their side, his formal attire doing little to disguise his essential ruggedness. "Dalton is here," he informed them in a low voice. "Northwest corner of the room, speaking with the banker Harrison and his wife. Don't look directly at him, yet we want to maintain the element of surprise as long as possible." Ethan guided Thea further into the room, positioning them where they could observe Dalton without being obvious about it. The cattle baron was resplendent in an expensive suit, his silver hair carefully styled, a glass of champagne held casually in one hand as he laughed at something his companion had said. The sight of him so confident, so completely at ease sent a surge of anger through Thea. This man had attempted to purchase her like livestock, had sent armed men to hunt her down when she escaped, had threatened the life of the man now standing beside her. Yet here he stood, accepted and respected by society, his crimes hidden behind a veneer of wealth and influence. "Easy," Ethan murmured, sensing her tension. "Remember the plan. Another 20 minutes, then Hargrove gives the signal." Thea forced herself to relax, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing server and pretending to sip it as they moved casually through the crowd. Hargrove's deputies were visible at strategic points around the room, dressed as guests but alert and watchful. The governor himself had not yet appeared, scheduled to make his entrance just before the formal dinner. "Dance with me," Ethan suggested suddenly. "It will give us a reason to move around the room without appearing suspicious." Before Thea could question the suggestion, he had led her to the small dance floor where a few couples were already swaying to the orchestra's waltz. His hand settled at her waist, the other clasping hers as he guided her into the dance with unexpected grace. "You dance well," she observed, surprised by his confidence in this social setting. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "My mother insisted I learn." Said a man never knows when such skills might prove useful. "She was right," Thea replied, relaxing into the movement. Despite the tension of their situation, there was something undeniably pleasant about being held in Ethan's arms, moving in harmony to the music. As they turned, Thea caught sight of Dalton again, now conversing with a different group. For a heart-stopping moment, she thought he had noticed her. His gaze seemed to sweep in their direction, but he showed no sign of recognition, his attention returning to his companions without pause. "He doesn't recognize me," she realized aloud. "In this dress with my hair arranged differently." "That works to our advantage," Ethan noted. "The longer he remains unaware of your presence, the less time he has to prepare a response." They completed another circuit of the dance floor before Ethan subtly guided them back toward the edge of the room. Hargrove was approaching, his expression indicating that the time for action had arrived. "The governor will be entering in 5 minutes," he informed them quietly. "That's our cue." "Are you ready, Miss Reynolds?" Thea took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I'm ready." "Good. Ryder, bring her to the west entrance when you see me move toward Dalton. Harrison and his wife have been moved away, they're not to be caught in this." With a nod to them both, Hargrove moved away, signaling subtly to his deputies as he did so. The atmosphere in the room seemed to shift subtly, an almost imperceptible tension building as law enforcement personnel prepared to move. "Whatever happens," Ethan said softly, his hand still holding Thea's from their dance, "remember that you're not alone in this. I'll be right beside you." The simple reassurance meant more than elaborate promises could have. Thea squeezed his hand in acknowledgement, then released it as they positioned themselves near the designated entrance. A sudden stir at the main doors announced the governor's arrival. As the assembled guests turned to greet the territory's highest official, Hargrove made his move, striding purposefully toward Dalton with 2 deputies flanking him. Ethan immediately guided Thea forward, timing their approach to coincide with Hargrove's. "Frederick Dalton," Hargrove's voice carried clearly despite his moderate tone. "I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of cattle rustling, extortion, and conspiracy to commit murder." Dalton's reaction was one of studied outrage rather than surprise. "This is absurd," he declared, loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "and completely inappropriate for such an occasion. Whatever grievance you think you have, Marshal, it can be addressed through proper channels tomorrow." "The proper channel is standing right before you," Hargrove replied evenly. "And your arrest will proceed here and now." It was at this moment that Dalton caught sight of Thea approaching with Ethan. His expression froze, then transformed from artificial indignation to genuine fury as recognition dawned. "You," he hissed, taking a step toward her before the deputies moved to block his path. "This is your doing, you ungrateful Frederick Dalton," Thea interrupted, her voice stronger than she had expected. "I formally identify you as the man who attempted to force me into marriage against my will, who sent armed men to pursue me when I escaped, and who ordered the death of the United States Marshal who assisted me." The public accusation, delivered clearly enough for nearby guests to hear, created an immediate stir. Conversation ceased as attention focused on the confrontation unfolding in their midst. The governor himself had paused in his entrance, observing the scene with keen interest. "Lies," Dalton spat, his carefully cultivated image of respectability cracking under pressure. "The ravings of a disturbed woman and a corrupt lawman. I demand to speak with my lawyer before any further action is taken." "You'll have ample opportunity to consult legal counsel," Hargrove assured him, "after you've been processed at the territorial jail. Gentlemen, secure the prisoner." As the deputies moved to handcuff Dalton, a commotion erupted at the edge of the crowd. James Cortez, whom Thea hadn't noticed among the guests, was attempting to push his way toward his employer, one hand reaching ominously inside his jacket. "Gun," Ethan shouted, simultaneously pushing Thea behind him and reaching for his own weapon. What followed happened so quickly that Thea would later struggle to recall the exact sequence of events. Cortez drew a revolver, guests screamed and scattered, and multiple shots rang out in the confined space of the ballroom. When the chaos subsided moments later, Cortez lay motionless on the marble floor, blood pooling beneath him. One of Hargrove's deputies was clutching his arm where a bullet had grazed him, and Dalton stood frozen in shock, his escape attempt thwarted by the swift response of law enforcement. "Is everyone all right?" The governor's voice cut through the pandemonium, restored order with surprising speed. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. The situation is under control." Ethan turned to Thea, his eyes scanning her for any sign of injury. "Are you hurt?" No, she assured him, though her heart was racing so violently she could barely speak. I'm fine. You, fine, he confirmed, his hand still resting protectively on her arm. It's over now, they've got Dalton. Indeed, the cattle baron was being led away in handcuffs, his earlier bravado replaced by a stunned silence as he realized the completeness of his downfall. Without Cortez to enforce his will or intimidate witnesses, and with the territorial governor himself witnessing his arrest, Dalton's power had evaporated in an instant. The reception, unsurprisingly, dissolved into confusion following the incident. The governor, after consulting briefly with Marshal Hargrove, announced that the event would be postponed to another date and requested that guests depart in an orderly fashion. Medical attention was summoned for the wounded deputy, while other lawmen secured the scene and began taking statements from witnesses. Through it all, Ethan remained at Thea's side, a steady presence amidst the chaos. When Hargrove finally approached them, his expression was one of grim satisfaction. Dalton's been transported to the jail, he informed them. And based on the reaction to Cortez's attempt, we've already had 3 witnesses come forward with additional information about his operations. This case is solid, Miss Reynolds. You did well. The praise should have been gratifying, but Thea found herself too emotionally exhausted to fully appreciate it. The confrontation, the gunfire, the sudden violence, it was all catching up to her now that the immediate danger had passed. Can we leave? She asked Ethan quietly. I need some air. Understanding immediately, Ethan nodded to Hargrove. I'm taking Miss Reynolds back to the hotel. She's had enough for one night. Of course, the marshal agreed. I'll send a deputy to guard her room within the hour. Until then, I'll stay with her, Ethan finished the thought. No one will get past me. The walk back to the hotel was silent, Thea too overwhelmed for conversation and Ethan seemingly content to respect her need for quiet. The night air was cool and refreshing after the stifling atmosphere of the ballroom, helping to clear Thea's head and settle her racing thoughts. Only when they reached her hotel room did she finally speak. It doesn't feel real yet, she admitted as Ethan checked the room before allowing her to enter. That it's actually over, that he's really been arrested. It's real, Ethan assured her, closing the door behind them. Dalton will stand trial, and with the evidence we've gathered, he'll almost certainly be convicted. He won't threaten you or anyone else again. The certainty in his voice was comforting, but it raised again the question that had been lingering since their conversation the previous day. And now what happens? She asked, turning to face him directly. You return to your original mission and I, testify at the trial and then try to rebuild my life somewhere? Ethan hesitated, something vulnerable flickering across his features. Is that what you want? To go your separate way once this is over? I don't know what I want, Thea admitted honestly. A week ago, all I could think about was escaping Dalton. I never allowed myself to consider what might come after because it seemed like such an impossible dream. And now, Ethan prompted gently. Thea met his gaze, drawing courage from the warmth she found there. Now I find myself wondering if there might be a future that includes the man who helped me claim my freedom, who saw me as a person worth protecting, not a possession to be claimed. The admission hung between them, an invitation that required equal vulnerability in response. For a moment, Thea feared she had misread the signals, had imagined an interest that wasn't truly there. Then Ethan closed the distance between them, his hands coming up to frame her face with exquisite gentleness. I've been wondering the same thing, he confessed. Every day since I found you in that alley in Silver Creek, every hour we've spent together since. And what conclusion have you reached? Thea asked, hardly daring to breathe as his face lowered toward hers. That some complications are worth embracing, he murmured, just before his lips met hers in a kiss that felt simultaneously like a beginning and a completion, the final piece of a puzzle falling into place. When they parted, Thea felt as though something fundamental had shifted within her world. The future that had seemed so uncertain just moments before now held a clarity that was both thrilling and terrifying in its implications. "This won't be easy," Ethan cautioned, his hands still cradling her face. "My work takes me all over the territory, often into danger. And you'll need to testify at Dalton's trial, possibly face him again in that courtroom." "I know," Thea acknowledged, "but nothing worth having comes easily, especially not on the frontier." A smile, one of his rare, full smiles that transformed his entire face, spread across Ethan's features. "There's a small town called Meadow Creek about 2 days' ride from here," he said. "It's peaceful, growing steadily, and in need of a marshal since the previous one retired. I've been offered the position 3 times now." "And you've refused it 3 times, Thea guessed. Ethan nodded. "I told myself I preferred the freedom of the trail, the challenge of tracking fugitives across the territory. But lately I've been wondering if there might be something to be said for putting down roots, especially if I had the right reason to do so." The implication was clear, but Thea needed to hear it directly. "Are you asking me to come with you to Meadow Creek after the trial is over?" "I'm asking for more than that," Ethan replied, his voice deepening with emotion. "I'm asking if you might consider becoming my wife, not because someone else arranged it, not because of circumstance or necessity, but because you choose to, because we choose each other." The proposal, so unexpected yet somehow perfectly timed, left Thea momentarily speechless. Just weeks ago, she had fled from a wedding she never wanted, from a man who saw her as property to be acquired. Now, another man was offering marriage, but one based on mutual respect, shared experiences, and genuine affection that had grown despite the extraordinary circumstances of their meeting. "Your bride by choice," she said softly, remembering their conversation days earlier about freedom and self-determination. "Yes, Ethan Ryder, yes, I will." The kiss that followed sealed their commitment, a promise more binding than any formal ceremony could provide. When they finally separated, both were smiling despite the tears that had gathered in Thea's eyes. "We'll need to wait until after the trial," she pointed out practically. "And I'll need to find something to wear besides a borrowed gown or men's clothing." Ethan laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "We have time," he assured her. "And I suspect Marie might have some ideas about a wedding dress that doesn't come with painful memories attached." The mention of Marie brought a surge of gratitude for the woman who had sheltered them in their time of need. "We should return to her ranch after the initial depositions are complete," Thea suggested. "Thank her properly for her help. And give her the satisfaction of knowing her matchmaking efforts succeeded," Ethan asked with a raised eyebrow. "She'll be insufferable." "She earned the right to gloat a little," Thea replied, smiling at the memory of Marie's knowing glances and pointed comments about not letting go of things worth holding on to. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. The Deputy Hargrove had promised to send as a guard. Ethan moved to answer it, confirming the man's identity before allowing him to take up his post in the hallway. "I should go," he said reluctantly, returning to Thea. "For propriety's sake, if nothing else, we've caused enough scandal for one evening without adding to it." Thea nodded, understanding the necessity even as she wished for more time alone with him. "Tomorrow, then, we'll need to meet with Hargrove again to complete the formal statements." "Tomorrow," Ethan agreed, stealing one more kiss before moving toward the door. "And every day after that, if you'll have me." "I already said yes," Thea reminded him with a smile. "Don't make me repeat myself, Marshal Ryder." His answering grin stayed with her long after he had departed, warming her through the night like a promise of the future they would build together, not one imposed by others, but one they had chosen for themselves. 5 months later, the small church in Meadow Creek was filled with flowers and sunlight as Thea Reynolds stood before the altar beside Ethan Ryder. Her dress, a simple creation of ivory silk that Marie had helped design, caught the golden light streaming through the windows. There was no veil this time. Thea had decided against it, preferring to face her future with clear eyes and nothing between her and the man she was choosing to marry. Frederick Dalton's trial had concluded 2 months earlier with a conviction on all charges, his empire dismantled, and his ill-gotten gains seized by the territorial government. The man himself would spend the remainder of his life in prison, his influence and power permanently broken. Thea's testimony had been crucial to the case, her clear recounting of his criminal activities, persuading even the most skeptical jurors of his guilt. Now, as she spoke her vows to Ethan, promises made freely, and with full heart, Thea felt the final shadows of that earlier forced ceremony lift completely. This was what a wedding should be. A celebration of love and partnership, not a business transaction or an exercise in control. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared, beaming at the couple before him. "Marshal Ryder, you may kiss your bride." As Ethan's lips met hers, sealing their union before the assembled guests, Thea knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just safety or security in this man, but a true partner, someone who valued her strength as much as her softness, who saw her as an equal rather than a possession. "Mrs. Ryder," Ethan murmured as they parted, his green eyes alight with happiness. "My bride by choice." "Always," Thea promised, taking his arm as they turned to face their friends and new neighbors. "By choice, by love, by all the things that truly matter." Together, they walked into the sunlight and the future they had claimed for themselves, one built not on obligation or necessity, but on the foundation of mutual respect and freely given love that would sustain them through all the challenges and joys that lay ahead in their shared life on the frontier.